The champagne was still bubbling when the air in the ballroom turned to ice. I had spent 3 years building Ryan's throne, waiting for the moment he'd ask me to sit beside him, but the man on one knee wasn't looking at me. He was offering a ring to Camille, my best friend, my confidant, the woman who had watched me sacrifice everything for him while she was busy measuring the drapes in my future home. In that heartbeat, standing under the suffocating weight of 1,000 elite stares, I didn't just want to cry. I wanted to watch their perfect world go up in flames, but before we continue, please smash the subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from. Now let's get back this commotion. For Zara Thompson, betrayal wasn't a slow burn, it was a public execution. She had been the architect of Ryan Whitmore's financial success, only to realize she was the sacrifice for his ultimate merger. As the glittering crowd of Seoul's high society looked on with patronizing pity, Zara realized her mistake. She had played by the rules in a world that only respected power. She didn't stay for the applause. She walked out into the biting Seoul rain, her elegant blue dress a reminder of the life she was leaving behind. Driven by a need to erase the loyal, boring girlfriend version of herself, she stumbled into a dimly lit lounge where the atmosphere hummed with quiet, expensive danger. Her eyes locked with Lee Hyun-woo's, a man with a dragon-style neck tattoo and a presence that demanded absolute submission. Fueled by a cocktail of rage and rebellion, Zara didn't ask for a favor, she took a claim. By pulling the head of the Lee syndicate into a heavy, desperate kiss, she crossed the point of no return. She wasn't just looking for a way to forget her heartbreak, she was looking for a weapon to finish the war Ryan had started. The Itaewon rain felt like a million needles against my skin, but the cold was nothing compared to the ice water realization that my life as I knew it had been a lie. I didn't stop to wipe the mascara running down my cheeks as I pushed through the heavy velvet doors of the lounge. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive sandalwood and the low, rhythmic hum of a city that thrived on secrets. The red neon lighting bathed the room in a bloody hue, casting long, sharp shadows over the patrons who moved with a grace that felt predatory. I didn't want comfort, I wanted to destroy the version of myself that Ryan had found so easy to discard. My eyes locked onto him immediately. He sat in the far corner booth, a silhouette of absolute authority framed by the crimson glow. His tailored black suit looked like armor, and even from across the room, the dragon-style tattoo snaking up his neck promised a danger that made my heart hammer against my ribs. He wasn't looking at the crowd, he was looking through them, his dark eyes radiating a stillness that made the world around him feel frantic. I marched toward him, the clicking of my heels on the marble floor sounding like a countdown. I could feel the eyes of his associates, men with hard faces and hands tucked into their jackets, tracking my every move. I didn't care. As I reached his table, the man didn't flinch. He simply watched me with a bored, lethal curiosity. "You look like you need a reason to burn the world down," I whispered, my voice thick with the adrenaline of a woman who had nothing left to lose. I didn't wait for his permission. I leaned down, my hand gripping his silk lapel so hard my knuckles turned white, and I pulled him into a kiss that tasted of vodka, rain, and pure, unadulterated rebellion. I expected him to push me away, to have me thrown out, or to kill me right there. Instead, Hyun-woo remained perfectly still. His response wasn't born of surprise, but of a terrifying, intentional dominance. He didn't chase the kiss, yet his presence consumed me, his eyes remaining open for a split second as if he were cataloging my soul before they slowly closed. Around us, the lounge went silent as phones were raised like weapons. The flash of cameras cut through the red haze, capturing the image that would soon shatter the internet, the good girl Zara Thompson, gripping the most feared man in Seoul like he was her only lifeline. Hyun-woo's hand didn't move to my waist, he remained an immovable force, his calm face a chilling contrast to my emotional collapse. In that moment, the viral sensation was born, and as we finally broke apart, the look in his dark eyes told me I hadn't just kissed a stranger, I had signed a contract with the devil. The cool air of the lounge was suddenly replaced by a stifling wall of black suits as I tried to pull away. Hyun-woo's men moved with the silent, synchronized precision of shadows, cutting off every exit before I could even take a breath of the rain-scented air. The phone screens in the room were still glowing, digital witnesses to the chaos I had just ignited. I turned to flee, but a hand, large and immovable, caught my upper arm. It wasn't a grip meant to hurt, but it was a clear message: you don't walk away from a dragon once you've pulled its tail. You have a very strange way of introducing yourself, Zura Thompson, Hyun-woo said, his voice a low, dark silk that vibrated through the small space between us. He had risen from the booth, and his full height was even more intimidating than the dragon tattoo on his neck. He didn't look angry, he looked like a man who had just found a very interesting piece of leverage. He gestured toward one of the many glowing phones. The video of our kiss was already spreading like a virus through Seoul's social networks. By morning, the Park family, my rivals, will believe you are the only thing I care about. They will come for you to get to me, he said, his eyes tracking the fear that finally began to eclipse my rage. And your ex-boyfriend? He's already calling. He wants to know why his boring girlfriend is in the arms of a monster. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a frantic, relentless vibration from Ryan. I looked at Hyun-woo, the adrenaline finally fading into the terrifying reality of what I had done. I just wanted them to hurt, I whispered. They will, Hyun-woo promised, stepping into my personal space until I was forced back against the mahogany bar. But everything has a price. I need a fiancé, someone loud, someone public, someone who draws enough attention to smoke out the traitor currently selling my secrets to the Parks. You want revenge, I want a target. He leaned in closer, his thumb grazing the line of my jaw where the heat of the kiss still lingered. Play the part for 6 months. I will protect your life, and in exchange, I will give you the tools to bankrupt Ryan Whitmore and Camille Brooks until they are begging for the scraps of the life they stole from you. The stakes were clear: stay with him and become a queen of the underworld, or walk out those doors and wait for the Parks, or the humiliation, to finish me off. I looked into his cold, dark eyes and saw the weapon I had been looking for. Deal, I said, my voice finally steady. Before we continue, please smash the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. The black Mercedes glided through the iron gates of the Lee estate, a sprawling fortress tucked away in the hills of Pyeongchang-dong. The architecture was a jarring blend of traditional Korean hanok and cold, modern glass, a physical manifestation of Lee Hyun-woo himself. As the car came to a halt, the door was opened by a man whose posture was so rigid he seemed carved from stone. I stepped out, my heels clicking against the pristine stone driveway, feeling the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes watching me from the shadows of the compound. Hyun-woo didn't wait for me. He walked toward the main entrance with a disciplined, rhythmic stride that signaled absolute control. I followed, entering a world that felt devoid of warmth, where the air was heavy with the scent of expensive incense and the silence of a graveyard. Every piece of furniture, every ink wash painting on the wall, felt placed with a precision that bordered on the lethal. This is your home for the next 6 months, Hyun-woo said, turning to face me in the center of a cavernous marble foyer. The red glow of the lounge was gone, replaced by the harsh, unforgiving light of the estate. Without the neon haze, the dragon tattoo on his neck looked even more vivid, its scales seemingly shifting as he spoke. It wasn't just art, it was a brand of his identity, a permanent reminder that this man existed outside the laws of the world I once knew. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter, his movements entirely devoid of desperation or haste. He handed me one, his fingers grazing mine. The contact was electric, yet his expression remained a mask of emotional restraint. There are rules here, Zara, he murmured, his dark eyes locking onto mine. You do not leave without an escort. You do not speak to my mother unless she speaks to you. And you never forget that to the world outside these walls, you belong to me. I looked at the dragon on his neck and then at the diamond ring he had just slid onto my finger, a stone so large it felt like a shackle. I realized then that I hadn't just moved into a mansion, I had entered a cage. But as I caught my reflection in the dark glass of the window, seeing the girl in the blue dress who had been betrayed by love, I knew I would endure this cold, restrained world if it meant burning Ryan's empire to the ground. The silence of the Lee estate was a weapon, but my laptop screen was a shield. While Hyunwoo's world slept in shadows, I sat in the sprawling library, the cold glow of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. Before Ryan Whitmore was a traitor, he was my partner, and I knew every digital footprint he left behind. I was a corporate strategist, not a pawn, and it was time to stop mourning and start auditing. My fingers flew over the keys, bypassing the basic firewalls of Whitmore and Associates. I navigated through encrypted folders with a surgeon's precision, fueled by a simmering rage that made my focus sharper than it had ever been. I wasn't looking for love letters or hidden photos, I was looking for the numbers. Ryan and Camille had been too arrogant to think I'd ever look back at the books once I was ousted. The first file I opened felt like a physical blow to the chest. It was a draft for a strategic asset realignment, dated 3 months ago, well before the public proposal. As I scrolled through the spreadsheets, the true scope of their betrayal crystallized. This wasn't just about a wedding, it was a hostile takeover. Camille hadn't just stolen my man, she had signed off on a plan to systematically devalue my father's logistics company, the Thompson Legacy, to make it ripe for a forced buyout. They were using Camille's family real estate ties to block my father's shipping lanes, creating artificial debt that would lead to a bankruptcy filing by next quarter. Ryan had documented every weakness I'd ever shared with him in confidence, turning my vulnerabilities into a roadmap for my family's ruin. He wasn't just moving on, he was erasing me and everything I came from to secure his seat at the park's table. It's worse than you thought, isn't it? I didn't turn around. The scent of sandalwood and expensive whiskey told me Hyunwoo was standing in the doorway. They aren't just getting married, I said, my voice sounding like gravel. They're liquidating my life. They're planning to bankrupt my father's company to fund their new venture with the parks. Hyunwoo stepped into the light, his dragon tattoo catching the glare of the screen. He leaned over my shoulder, his presence a cold, stabilizing weight. Now you see why I don't trust the light of day, Zara. In my world, we stab you in the front. In yours, they do it with a signature and a smile. I closed the laptop with a snap. The good girl who believed in merit and loyalty died in that library. I don't want to just stop the merger, I whispered, looking up at him. I want to leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Hyunwoo's lips quirked into a ghost of a smile, a predatory, approving thing. Then let's stop playing defense. Tomorrow, we start the counter-offensive. Hyunwoo stood behind me in the walk-in closet of the estate, his reflection a sharp contrast to the soft silk of the emerald gown I wore. He didn't look at the dress, he looked at my eyes. You're still holding your breath, Zara, he murmured, his voice a low vibration near my ear. In this world, the moment you show desperation is the moment you lose. Silence is your greatest weapon. If they can't read your hunger, they can't feed you poison. He reached forward, his fingers cool against my skin as he adjusted the high collar of the gown. Ryan expects you to be a victim. He expects you to scream, to beg, to demand an explanation. Tonight, you will give him nothing but a cold, beautiful void. I practiced the mask he demanded, shoulders back, chin tilted, eyes reflecting the same icy restraint that defined the man standing beside me. I was no longer the girl who had been displaced, I was becoming the woman who owned the room. The investment summit was held in a glass-walled skyscraper overlooking the Han River. When we entered, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The hum of corporate chatter died as Hyunwoo led me through the crowd, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. We moved with the weight of an empire behind us. I saw them near the bar, Ryan and Camille. Ryan looked polished in a gray suit, but the moment his eyes landed on me, his composure fractured. His glass tilted slightly, champagne spilling over his knuckles as he stared at the woman I had become. I didn't flinch. I didn't look for his approval. I looked through him, as if he were a ghost haunting a life I had already outgrown. Zira? Ryan's voice was strained, thick with a jealousy he couldn't hide as he stepped toward us, ignoring Camille's tightening grip on his arm. What the hell is this? What are you doing with him? I felt Hyunwoo's presence solidify behind me, his dragon tattoo peeking out from his collar like a silent threat. I waited 3 long seconds before answering, a lesson in dominance Hyunwoo had drilled into me. I'm moving on, Ryan, I said, my voice as smooth and cold as the marble floor beneath us. I realized I was overqualified for the position you offered. I prefer a partner who deals in power, not just paper. The look of pure, unadulterated rage on Ryan's face was the first payment on the debt he owed me. As Hyunwoo leaned down to whisper an intimate, calculated secret in my ear, the flashbulbs of the paparazzi captured Ryan's total humiliation. He wasn't just losing a girlfriend, he was realizing that he had handed his greatest asset over to his most dangerous rival. Before we continue, please smash the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. The drive back from the summit was silent, the interior of the armored Mercedes smelling of cold leather and the lingering scent of Hyunwoo's cologne. The victory over Ryan's ego felt sweet, but the weight of the diamond on my finger was a constant reminder that power invited predators. I watched the blurred lights of Seoul streak across the bulletproof glass, realizing that in this world, the shadow of the dragon was long, but the shadows of his enemies were darker. The ambush happened at the mouth of the private tunnel leading to the estate. A deafening roar of an engine preceded the impact. A heavy-duty truck slammed into our lead security vehicle, spinning it into a flaming wreck that blocked the path. Before our driver could reverse, black SUVs swarmed from the rear, boxing us in. Glass didn't shatter, it spiderwebbed under the force of high-caliber rounds. Stay down. Hyunwoo commanded, his voice devoid of panic, sharpened into a blade of pure authority. He pulled a sleek handgun from his holster, his movements fluid and practiced. Beside him, I curled into a ball on the floorboards, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was the Park family's response. They weren't just after Hyunwoo, they were after the woman who had made him look vulnerable in public. One of the bodyguards in the front seat was hit, his blood splattering against the dashboard. The driver was shouting into a radio, returning fire through the gun ports. Hyunwoo kicked the door open, using it as a shield while he neutralized 2 gunmen approaching from the left. But as he turned to cover the rear, a third shooter lunged toward the broken window on my side, a jagged piece of metal in his hand, his eyes wild with the intent to drag me out. Hyunwoo was occupied, his back turned as he held off a suppressive line of fire. I saw the secondary weapon, a smaller, compact pistol, that had slid from the fallen bodyguard's holster onto the floor beside my hand. For a heartbeat, I was the girl who played by the rules, the corporate lawyer who believed in due process. I wanted to scream, to close my eyes and wait for the monster to save me. But then I thought of Ryan's smirk, of my father's legacy being dismantled by signatures, and I realized that being a victim was a luxury I no longer possessed. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I grabbed the cold steel of the grip. It was heavier than I expected. As the gunman reached through the gap, his fingers inches from my throat, I didn't hesitate. I raised the weapon, braced my shaking hands, and fired. The recoil jarred my teeth, but the threat collapsed. Hyunwoo spun around, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second as he saw me standing over the fallen man, the gun still smoking in my hand. The good girl was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that in Seoul's underworld, you either wielded the weapon or you became the target. Good, Hyunwoo murmured, his voice dark and approving as the sirens of his reinforcements finally wailed in the distance. Now you're finally mine. The scent of expensive jasmine and sterile tea hung in the private garden of the Shilla Hotel, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of gunpowder that still lingered in my memory. Camille sat across from me, her porcelain skin flawless, looking every bit the grieving friend. She reached across the table, her hand trembling with a practiced fragility that I once would have mistaken for genuine concern. "Zara, please," she whispered, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "You have to listen to me. You're in over your head. Hyun-woo is a monster, he's using you as a shield against the Parks. I'm terrified for you." I looked at her hand, then at the blurred reflection of our past friendship in the polished silver teapot. For years, I had shared my deepest fears with this woman, never realizing she was merely collecting data for my eventual replacement. I didn't pull away, I waited 3 beats, letting the silence stretch until her fake sympathy began to crack under the weight of my indifference. "Terrified for me, Camille?" I asked, my voice as cold and level as the emotional restraint Hyun-woo had drilled into me. "Or terrified of the stock prices?" Her hand flinched, retreating to her lap. "What is that supposed to mean?" "I've seen the strategic asset realignment drafts," I said, leaning forward until the red neon memories of the lounge felt like they were bleeding into the daylight. "I know about the forced buyout of my father's logistics company. You aren't here to save me from a monster. You're here because our viral engagement is devaluing your merger. Every time I'm seen with Hyun-woo, the Park family gets nervous, and your investors start to pull back." The perfect facade finally shattered. The softness in Camille's eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, calculating glint that was far more honest. "You're being reckless, Zara. If you continue this stunt, you'll destroy the very company you claim to love. Ryan and I can stabilize things, but only if you walk away now and issue a public retraction." I realized then that Camille was no longer a wild card, she was a mirror of Ryan's arrogance. She truly believed she could still manage me like an entry-level clerk. I stood up, the emerald silk of my dress rustling like a warning. "You didn't choose Ryan because you fell in love, Camille. You chose him because you saw a business decision. And now you've realized you made a very poor investment." I turned to leave, catching a glimpse of a black SUV parked at the curb, Hyun-woo's men, my shadow and my protection. "Tell Ryan the audit is only the beginning," I said over my shoulder. "I'm not the boring girlfriend anymore. I'm the liability you can't afford." The digital war began not with a bang, but with a series of coordinated keystrokes in the dead of night. I sat in the command center of the Lee estate, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the cold resolve on my face. Hyun-woo stood behind me, a silent, stabilizing presence, his hand resting near the dragon tattoo on his neck as he watched the data stream. We weren't just leaking gossip, we were dismantling a facade built on lies and stolen labor. "He thinks his reputation is bulletproof," I whispered, my fingers dancing across the keyboard to release the first set of encrypted files. "He forgot who wrote the code for his safety net." The first wave hit the financial news cycles at dawn on the Monday of his wedding week. We leaked the strategic asset realignment drafts, exposing the fraudulent devaluing of my father's logistics company. By noon, the narrative of Ryan Whitmore as a visionary consultant began to crumble, replaced by the reality of a corporate raider who used his fiancée's family as a sacrificial lamb. Hyun-woo leaned in, his voice a dark, silk-threaded hum. "Now, give them the blood in the water." I hit send on the second payload, a trail of offshore accounts Ryan had used to skim from the Park family's real estate holdings to fund his own private ventures. The betrayal was absolute, he hadn't just used me, he had been stealing from his new allies, too. The reaction was instantaneous. My screen lit up with alerts as Ryan's major investors began to flee, the exodus of capital sounding like a death knell in the high-stakes world of soul finance. By Tuesday, the merger was in freefall. By Wednesday, 3 of Ryan's biggest board members issued a public vote of no confidence. I watched the live feed of the Whitmore and Associates lobby on a side monitor. Ryan was visible through the glass doors, looking frantic, his polished gray suit wrinkled as he shouted into a phone. He looked small, a far cry from the man who had stood on one knee for Camille. He was realizing that the boring girlfriend he had discarded was now the architect of his absolute ruin. "The investors are gone," I said, leaning back into the expensive leather of the chair. The rage that had fueled me for months had cooled into a sharp, professional satisfaction. Hyun-woo's eyes met mine in the reflection of the darkened screen. "A business decision, wasn't it?" he remarked, echoing the cold logic Ryan had used to break my heart. The week of his dream wedding had become a nightmare of litigation and bankruptcy. I wasn't just a shadow in the background anymore. I was the storm that had finally arrived at his doorstep. Before we continue, please smash the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. The eve of the wedding should have been a celebration of a union, but instead, it became a symphony of breaking glass and gunfire. The Lee estate, once a silent fortress of cold marble, was suddenly engulfed in the chaos of a desperate, final stand. Ryan and the Park family, pushed to the brink of bankruptcy by the financial sting, had abandoned the courtroom for the kill. I was in the upper gallery when the first explosion rocked the foundation, the shockwave shattering the traditional hanok partitions into lethal splinters. The red neon glow of my memory was replaced by the orange flickering of fires in the garden. Below, the Lee Syndicate's defenders moved with disciplined precision, but the sheer volume of the Park family's assault was a tidal wave of blood and silk. "Zara, stay in the reinforced room." Hyun-woo's voice crackled over the comms, breathless but commanding. I saw him on the security monitors, a silhouette of lethal grace standing his ground in the foyer, the dragon tattoo on his neck bared as he held off a breach. But then I saw a side feed, a group of men led by a frantic, disheveled Ryan were moving through the service tunnels I had audited just days before. He wasn't coming for the money anymore, he was coming for me. I didn't hide. I reached into the hidden compartment of the mahogany desk and pulled out the compact pistol I had learned to master. My heart didn't hammer with the panic of a victim, it thrummed with the steady pulse of a woman who had been trained by a monster. As the door to the gallery was kicked open, Ryan stumbled in, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "You ruined everything," he screamed, his voice cracking with the desperation of a man who had lost his status. He raised a weapon, his hands shaking with a weakness I had once called love. I didn't wait for him to find his courage. I remembered Hyun-woo's lessons: never show desperation, never hesitate. I moved with a speed that would have been impossible for the boring girlfriend of months ago. Using the heavy silk curtains as a distraction, I flanked him, the training in self-defense kicking in as I disarmed him with a jarring strike to his wrist. Before he could recover, I had him pinned against the window, the cold steel of my weapon pressed against his jaw. Outside, the battle raged, but in here, there was only the silence of his terror. I looked into his eyes and saw nothing but a shadow of the man I used to know. I was no longer a pawn, I was the one holding the board. The dust of the estate's reconstruction settled over a soul that looked entirely different from the one I had entered 6 months ago. The headlines were no longer haunted by my humiliation, instead, they were dominated by the spectacular fall of the Whitmore Brooks empire. Ryan sat in a cold cell awaiting trial for the financial fraud and the desperate, violent assault on the Lee estate, his dreams of corporate grandeur reduced to a prison jumpsuit. Camille had vanished from the social register, her family's assets frozen and her reputation so thoroughly poisoned that even her former allies wouldn't answer her calls. They had sought a merger of status, but they had only succeeded in merging their own ruin. I stood on the expansive terrace of the Lee estate, the morning sun reflecting off the Han River. I was no longer the woman in the elegant blue dress who had acted out of a need for grounding or a rebellion against heartbreak. The hand that once gripped Hyun-woo's lapel in desperation now rested with a calm, intentional dominance on the stone railing. I had shed the loyalty to a fault that had kept me a pawn and had embraced the lethal rules of the game. The scent of sandalwood announced Hyunwoo before he even reached my side. He didn't stand behind me like a protector this time, he stood beside me, our shoulders nearly touching. The dragon tattoo on his neck was a mark I no longer feared, but one I understood as a symbol of the authority, wealth, and control we now shared. He turned to me, his dark eyes no longer reflecting a cold-blooded mask, but a rare, genuine spark of approving partnership. "The board is clear, Zara," he murmured, his voice a low, steady hum. "The Parks are retreating, and the Thompson legacy has been restored under your name." I looked at the diamond on my finger, no longer a shackle but a trophy. I had entered this world as a stranger acting from hurt, but I was staying as something far more dangerous, an equal. I wasn't his property, and I wasn't his boring shadow. As we looked out over the city that had once judged me, I realized the Phoenix arc was complete. I had been reduced to ashes by betrayal, only to be reborn in the danger and desire of the Lee Syndicate. "I told you I wanted to be a weapon," I said, my voice carrying the weight of inner strength and authenticity. "And I told you that I take what I want," Hyunwoo replied, his hand finding mine in a grip that was no longer a deal with the devil, but a claiming of the future. We weren't just a viral sensation anymore, we were the new order of Seoul. Before we continue, please smash the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from, and also tell us what you feel about the story you just watched.